I will introduce you, Lindsey, because I'm thrilled to be able to get to work with you now after we kind of met over a year ago. And it's just been awesome to see your course, and I can't wait for all the stuff you're going to do in the future. So for those of you who don't know, Lindsey Fileccia is a pediatric critical care medicine fellow here at UCSF, and she's had an amazing experience not only throughout her medical training, but last year she spent an entire year with SEED International, and she was the pediatric residency director for Mbali. She's actually the entire reason why we were able to have the connections with the pediatric residents in Uganda this year. So thank you so much for that. And we've invited her here today to tell us a little bit about that experience and what that was like in her real life global health career. So with that, Lindsey, it's all you.
Great. Thank you guys for having me. Talk about full circle. I watched these talks last year before I was even affiliated or had even applied to UCSF for fellowship. So it's really incredible to be here talking to you guys. I think I may have met some of you actually in our other session that I got to participate in recently, but I'm Lindsey. And my session today, the way I kind of think about this is when I was a resident, which was very recently, 2 years ago, I was at this point in my career where everyone else who seemed to be like doing global health was at least like a junior faculty person, and was kind of, 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 steps ahead of me in my career. And so it kind of felt like I couldn't relate in a way to where they were at. And so I've reflected on my journey and where I'm at, and am happy to share kind of how I got where I am, where I think I'm headed, and maybe that can be helpful for someone else who's trying to figure that out as well. So with that, I will share my screen. And let's see. Can you guys see this presentation that I made? I stole all of SEED's amazingly beautiful graphics from their redone website and used them. So I've decided to title this, I think appropriately, Teaching and Learning as an Early Career Global Pediatrician. And so to start, in case you haven't guessed, I'm quite interactive. Please feel free to interrupt with questions or anecdotes or whatever, but figured I would tell you a little bit about me so that we can see how I ended up where I'm at, and maybe give you guys some inspiration too. So I was born down here in Louisiana. That's where I did med school. And then for my residency, moved on up here to Cincinnati, Ohio. And then the whole reason we're here, I somehow ended up in Eastern Uganda, and now I'm here on the West Coast. So been hopping everywhere the last few years. Full start in Cincinnati, which is where I did residency, like most of you guys are doing right now. So I knew in my residency, I wanted to go to a place where global health was talked about, was a thing, was a pathway. I'm certain most of you guys that are on here with us right now can relate to that. And Cincinnati was an incredible place to do that. I met lots of people there who are like-minded in global health. But as a resident, I was kind of where you're at, thinking like, okay, everyone's doing all these great things. I think we had like Dr. Connolly on, she a couple of talks ago, maybe even today, doing some incredible, doing her work. And everyone seemed to have these projects that they had been doing for, X amount of years even. And they all seemed so established and kind of had already figured out their niche. And so I was playing this game of like, okay, well, I don't even know what I want to be. I don't know what's possible. I don't know what research I'm interested in, right? Definitely not a bench researcher, but is it clinical research? Is it QI and implementation science? Is it education? I kind of had no idea. And so this is kind of where I want to stop and give you my first piece of advice, which is no matter what you want to do, the people around you are really key. And so for me, instead of chasing an academic pursuit or a publication or a project, I just kind of started talking to people and figuring out what was out there. Oh man, I forgot my first meme for you guys. Yeah, so I'm in residency and I'm thinking, now what, right? I'm here, I made it to this place with a global health pathway. What do I do, right? And that's when I met Dr. Amy Rule. She is a perinatal hospitalist, or was at Cincinnati. She is now down in Emory doing pursuing some global health work down there. And I met up with her, and I knew I wasn't interested in babies, which is what her work is primarily in. I knew from the get-go that I wanted to be a pediatric intensivist. However, she was working in East Africa, which sounded interesting to me. She was doing things with kind of data and risk stratification, which I had never been involved with before, but also sounded interesting to me. And most of all, she was willing to teach me and learn with me and share her knowledge with me as an early career herself, global clinician. And so I kind of latched onto that. And that's where I think I first have figured out what is working for me, which is, even if it's not exactly what you think you want to do or exactly where you envision yourself, if you can find someone who's doing something that you admire, work that you admire, latching onto that is not a bad thing. It can kind of launch you to other things. So I started working with her on a perinatal project where I was going to get to go to East Africa twice during my residency, and then COVID happened. And so we had to pivot. For those of you Friends fans, just, to help us all. I know it's been a long day of lectures and talks. So someone's a fan. Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. And so we pivoted, and we actually ended up with this really cool, all digital. I got to kind of, do Zoom coordination with my colleagues at Tenwick in Kenya to risk stratify some neonates in a nursery there, and help to hopefully come up with an algorithm for them to eliminate or to kind of work on improving early onset sepsis in neonates. And so that's like neither here nor there, the specifics of it. But during this time, if you look at these people at the top, Amy Rule's my mentor, right? And then I got to work with some people who are doing work with the AAP. Dr. Bina Kames Rain does a ton of stuff. She works with AAP. I got to work with some amazing infectious disease colleagues. I got to work with these two ladies here, one of whom was just starting her research career, and one who is in medical school and is, about to be where you guys are at. And so this project was twofold for me. I realized I was interested in quality improvement and didn't realize that before. And then I realized I really enjoyed partnering with people who were at a kind of not as far along in their training or career as I was. And I really liked the teaching and mentoring aspect of that. So I'm learning all this in retrospect, right? In the meantime, this just felt like, oh, darn, I don't get to go to Kenya. I'm sitting on my laptop, digging through charts, up to my eyeballs in red cap entries. It didn't feel like a direction, but on reflection, I think that's when you can kind of look back and say, okay, what made this work? And for me, it was the partnership with the people and learning, even though I obviously don't want to be in a NICU for the rest of my life, I really want to work with people who are, engaging globally this way. So it was like a nice platform there. And then I decided, what's next for me after residency? Well, I've decided I want to be a pediatric intensivist, as I mentioned to you. So I apply to my PICU fellowship, and this is in 2020, 2021. And womp, 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 I did not match the first time. And I share this with you. I try to share this with all residents because I remember feeling super alone and isolated. It's not the point of this talk by any means, but just put it out there. I'm super happy with where I'm at now, very clearly in a PICU fellowship right now. And the rest of the story that you're about to hear is all because I didn't match. So I do want to put that part of the story in there. Yet another pivot, right? The now what meme, the pivot meme, they all were continually echoed throughout my residency. So here I am, haven't matched, trying to figure out what I want to do. I know I want to do global health. I'm in this climate where global things are all on hold because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And so I'm thinking to myself, what do I do next? And the thing that I applied this junction in my life is also what I applied very early on when I started residency, right? I'm going to be with people who are doing what I want to do, who, you know, in the spirit of what I want to do, even if it's not the exact thing. And then I want to keep kind of just pursuing this. Oh, forgive me. You're about to hear my partner and dogs come back. Limited space in here. I wanted to keep pursuing kind of topically what I want to do and just meet people along the way and learn what I like and what I don't like. So I had a couple of options available to me. You know, I was applying for like community pediatrician jobs and staff hospitalist jobs. And then one of my mentors who I had connected with at Cincinnati sent me an email. Hi, sweet girl. My dog is attempting to participate in this talk. Sent me an email about a job opening with Seed Global Health, who I had never heard of. Maybe most of you have never heard of them either, which is amazing because I would love to introduce you. And pretty much the email was literally like one sentence from this incredible mentor of mine. And he just said, like, these are good people. You should apply for this and do this if you can. That's really all I needed to hear. I applied immediately and kind of looked more into what they were doing. So Seed Global Health, right now, the kind of focus of their marketing, which I love, is that they're challenging the status quo on health inequity. And I normally don't share, I don't like words in case you haven't noticed, I like pictures. But this, I think, spoke to me from the beginning, from Seed's materials. It's kind of some goals, right? Sharing knowledge, strengthening the health system, and saving lives. So I saw this kind of big picture, sharing knowledge. Okay, I'm on board, right? Strengthening health systems. Okay, that's interesting. When I first started learning about global health in general, a term that we throw around a lot, I would always hear capacity building. And I actually can remember the moment I learned what that meant as a resident. Building capacity in a place, what does that look like? I think I had always envisioned it looking like material, right? Like capacity, more buildings, capacity, is there a CT scanner available, right? Are there ventilators, all these like material things. And this was the first time I think that I'd really thought about capacity building as building up people, building up a workforce and using that to save lives. So that was my first introduction and I was kind of sold from there. So now I want to share with you, again, pivoting, it can be the theme of our talk, what Seed's about from my eyes. I obviously can't speak for the whole organization, but I believe Dr. Kieran Mitha is on with us, and she was my, oh, there she is, she's waving. So feel free to message her or email her if she's going to be the person I point you to at the end of this. But kind of what Seed has meant to me for the last year, and then as I continue, how I continue to be involved. So I stole these slides straight from them, but they, kind of the premise is that there's a shortage of healthcare professionals, right? And these red areas that you see highlighted are where there's the most critical shortages. And then also, probably not coincidentally, where maternal and child mortality rates are the highest, where life expectancy is the shortest. And so that, I think, is kind of what Seed was born out of, is using how can we, as health professionals who are interested in making this inequity less, how can we intervene? And that's at the level of human resource shortage. And then let me rearrange my screen a little bit, but you can just see here, right? Just zooming in on the continent of Africa, 70% of the world's HIV burden is there. 24% of our burden of disease is on this one continent, and yet 3% of the workforce and 1% of the spending. That could be 5 talks on its own, but the numbers continue to be staggering to me, even though I've seen them and used the slide in a talk before. So again, I feel like the words here were really important and did a better job than I ever could at sharing exactly what Seed claims to do and also what they're actually doing, right? So envisions a world where our countries are strengthened by a robust health workforce, and that meets the health needs of the population. So that's the vision, right? And then the mission is, how do we do this? Well, we do it through educating a rising generation of health professionals. And that to me is really poignant because I feel like it's the intersection of where I'm at, right? I had just graduated residency and was interested in global health, right? Interested in building capacity across the world. Still unclear what that looked like. As a graduate, it's not like I had a lab or, was working, had a specific, project that I wanted to be my career. I was just still in this, I want to help people globally. How do I do it? Well, ironically, can help people by doing exactly what I had just done, which is to gain skills via education, right? And I had never thought of it that way, as educating the global workforce as a significant means to impact change and to improve health outcomes. But that's exactly what Seed has set out to do, and that's exactly what they're doing. Here's just some numbers that I thought were really cool. And these are for, I think, all of our sites, but there are, if you kind of want to go explore the website, it looks really cool and fancy now. And you have the same numbers for each different country. But they have placed over 200 educators at different sites within Africa, and I'll show you the different countries where they work, with 30 different institutional partners, which is key. I recognize I'm just kind of throwing tidbits of information at you of like pointers I've gleaned so far, but I think that's kind of the beauty at this stage of your career is you don't necessarily have a strict algorithm of how you got where you're at or what has helped you along the way. But for me, this is a key that has been helpful, which is making sure that the people that I engage with, the people and now organizations, as I'm kind of, stepping forward, are sustainable, right? That they're building partnerships and relationships. If you were logged on early, you might have heard me talking with Teresa and Sohail about our partnership with the residents in Uganda, who you'll meet. Maybe you've met in some sessions, but then also you'll meet via photos in a few minutes. And that is a beautiful, tangible example of what I'm talking about. They, met me through applying to UCSF for fellowship, and then immediately, reached out and said, how can we partner with you, offer our resources, use, your resources in Uganda, the knowledge and just the wealth of things to offer that the Ugandan residents have. How can we all partner together? And I think that's vital. You want to be with people who are partnering with people to make the world better, right? That sounds really idealistic, but I also think it's how we affect change. And so the 30 institutional partners was huge for me. 43 placement sites, that just means places where physicians or nurses or midwives could potentially go. And then this number is incredible to me. Almost 30,000 trainees have been taught, and that's just the ones that we've been able to capture in our data, right? And as someone who submitted the Excel sheets, not always on time, for the last year of helping us collect this data, I can tell you we're probably underestimating a little bit, which is really cool. So just kind of flipping gears a little more nitty gritty, because I do want you guys to know that not only was this my opportunity, but it is an opportunity, like, actively for you to do. And I'm a big believer of not supporting something, not verbally supporting something that I wouldn't actually support. And I would highly recommend that if this is interesting to you, that you consider this. So I'll just give you some nitty gritty up front. In general, it's a 12-month academic placement, which was perfect for me coming out of residency, right? I will say right now, I think basically the exact position that I had is actually open for kind of a critical 6-month placement. There's no one there right now, which makes me sad. And they're looking for someone to do a brief January to June stint. So that's not reflected in my slides, but if that's interesting to you, keep that in the back of your mind. And it's a mix, right? There's clinical training and there's education, which I plan to talk to you a lot more about if you're still with me. And then this part, again, is key. Every place that Seed is partnering with, and each one looks a little different depending on the needs of the site. They have 5-year plans. So I joined in year 3 of a 5-year plan, which was a really fun place to be, because enough of the plan had been either enacted or had enough time had gone by to see what we thought we wanted to enact, we actually needed to pivot a little bit. And we were in the perfect place where we had data of what worked and what didn't. And then we were able to meet and adjust and see how can we make the last 3 years of the partnership better. And I say last loosely, it's a finite block of time, and certainly extendable. So I thought that was key in being something tangible that was a marker of the sustainability of their partnerships, which I think probably not infrequently has come up in this series of people that you've heard from, which is being sustainable and kind of navigating that very tenuous line of global health colonization. And there's a movement to decolonize global health. I'm sure you've heard all this before. I hope you have. If not, please read into it. But I think that is one small piece that's combating that, is helping us all to make sure we're having reciprocal plans with people. So here again, I stole most of this from the website just because it's so beautiful. Here is 4 countries that there's work being done. See, it is multiple sites in Malawi, Sierra Leone, Uganda, and Zambia. And then this is just to show, so the only place there's, I think, unless that's changed, so maybe Dr. Mitha can chime in if that's new, but last I updated these, Sierra Leone was only needing nurses and midwives at this time, so not having physician placements, but there were physicians being placed in Uganda, Malawi, and Zambia, and then pediatricians specifically in Uganda and Malawi. And so again, just to kind of zoom out, in case you guys have partners, friends, buddies at work that you interact with in the hospital, it's not just for doctors. They're, the health workforce, we're all a big team, and we want to educate everyone everywhere. So nurses and midwives specifically are in very high demand as well. But for me, I was in Uganda. And there are 5 partnerships with 5 major universities in Uganda, Arua, Lira, Mbale, Kampala, which is the capital, and Mbarara. And I was over here in Eastern Uganda. Ironically, kind of on the border of Kenya, where I virtually did all my residency project, my pivot project, as I lovingly call it. So now comes like the photo montage, because by this point of the day, you're falling asleep and I don't have anything, written in stone to tell you. I just wanted to now just share what my experience was like, what yours could be like. And, anything I've learned along the way that may be applicable, even if partnering with Seed is not for you. So as you can see by this group, these are all of us, or most of us, that were going to all the sites in Uganda. When we first got there, we all met together, had a group orientation before we kind of set out and did our own things. So that was great. A bunch of lovely ladies from around the world. Seed gets you set up in some quick and dirty language lessons. We did, I think, 2 weeks of morning lectures. Ours was in Lugisu, which is one of the local dialects around the mountains of Mbale, where I lived. This is just an example from our tireless instructor, Francis, who was trying so hard. We were just very not good at Lugisu. I still have a couple phrases here or there, but it was fun but challenging. But my patients and families really appreciated it, and I appreciated that Seed did that. That helped us kind of really quickly integrate and just reach out and make that connection with our patients. Mbale is a really beautiful city. It is at the foot of Mount Elgon, and it's like a mountain range that kind of bridges Uganda and Kenya. And this is kind of the main street, Republic, where I walked all day, every day. All these pictures I either took or one of my colleagues there, Casey, who I'll actually mention later, she took herself. So please enjoy. Just a beautiful mountain range. This is the Wanali Ridge, right outside of, this is literally the view from where I would walk around my house when I wanted to get some exercise. So Mbale in general, it's primarily, there's actually another partner, but it's primarily I interface with Busatema University, which is the main university who you may have met some of the residents. And then the regional referral hospital, which is a government hospital. It's like a step down from the national, would be like the highest level, is if you're thinking about it, kind of how we think of tiered systems. They're like the second one down from that. So everyone in our region would come. If anyone's interested in ICU, this was great for me. I would occasionally get like transport calls, right, about someone who needed to come from a different place in Uganda, and how could we help navigate getting them there. That's really come in handy with my current skill set as I do that at the hospital. So just kind of small clinical pearls as we go too. As a physician educator in Mbale, and I will pause briefly and say, I think they're also looking for an OBGYN right now for this specific site, as well as a pediatrician. So keep that in mind if you have colleagues, may want to send them this link or the QR code I have for you at the end. But the focus of the site and all the sites is education. And so for me, it was educating primarily the pediatric residents, and then the interns at the hospital, and also the med students at the university. And then as far as the partnership plan in general, the focus is emergency maternal, neonatal, and child health. And so obviously I fit in with the neonatal and child health piece of that. And then I had, there was an OBGYN colleagues as well to kind of help with the rest of that acronym. And then some no physicians in the emergency piece of that partnership plan, but they also, that was kind of happening, I think, more in the adult world than in the peds world. So I kind of wore a bunch of hats, and I think this is where it kind of gets fun is, going in, I knew I was going to be a physician educator, right? So what does that look like? I knew I was going to partner with the university, maybe do some clinical things, but the day-to-day, even looking back, I got to do so much more than it seemed like on paper, which is why I've opted for a kind of a photo essay of sorts for you. But so on paper, my primary affiliation was with Busatema University. And for those of you who are not familiar with kind of the educational setup outside of the US, at least here in Uganda in general, the setup is a lot more similar to like our UK colleagues. So right out of like secondary school, you go to medical school. And it's 5 years of medical school, and it's like a kind of combined college and medical school. And so for me, I was interfacing with the 4th and 5th year medical students who were the US equivalent of 3rd and 4th year medical students, just kind of for your brain there. And then I'm saying residency program, and you heard Teresa also say residency program. For them, it's their Masters of Medicine in Pediatrics. So residency is me Americanizing that, and that's on me. For them, they're actually getting their master's degree, and so that looks a little different than it does here. At least my residency at Cincinnati, and what I'm observing for you UCSF friends, is you're primarily clinical. You're in the hospital all the time, probably more than you want to be. Just at the bedside. And not only were my Ugandan colleagues also in the hospital a ton and at the bedside, but they were attending what I sometimes equated to as like med school 2.0. I'll show you a sample schedule, but lecture in the morning, they would like go check on the patients before lectures, come sit through a 1-2 hour lecture with me or one of my other colleagues, then go around for several hours, then have an afternoon seminar, then go back to the wards. So they were integrating a really rigorous educational, like truly like didactic educational experience as well as a clinical experience. And so I think that's important background to know, because I had heard that on paper before I got there, but experiencing it, it just was so different than what I was used to, that I don't think I could fully comprehend what that looked like for them. So on arrival, got to meet, it's so fun to look at this picture. I remember this was like our first day touring the university, and here we're standing in front of the what is called Block 1, which is where the administrative offices and med school lecture classrooms are. My office was actually on the 3rd floor of this building, so I spent a ton of time here last year. And I remember taking this photo and meeting everyone in this photo. and thinking, oh my God, there's so many new people to meet. How will I ever, remember everyone? Everyone's so nice, but like I'm learning so many different names and faces. And now looking at this photo, I can, name everybody in it, which is great, and a fun evolution to look back upon. But this is our inaugural tour of the university. And I just wanted you to see kind of how great it is. I'll say, my favorite game was when I was there. I think it's easy when you're working cross-culturally is to point out all the differences, and there's plenty of those. And, most of the time they're neither good nor bad. They just kind of are different. But I also like to point out the similarities, and then what my Ugandan colleagues did much better than my American colleagues. It was one of my favorite games to play. And what they do much, much, much better is formal photos. I did so many fun formal photos like this, and I don't know that I've ever successfully gathered this many people to take a photo since I've been home. But so this was kind of just meeting everyone in the university, and then you can see some clinical folks mixed in there as well. And then here I have for you, again, just because I've said it out loud, this is a sample year-long the courses that our first year residents or MMed, Masters of Medicine students would have taken. And so this is kind of how I started there. I got there and I have no formal education training, right? Straight out of residency. I made sure when I applied to say, is this an appropriate position for me? So kind of switching gears again, thanks for bearing with my topic changes. I think an important thing that I've seen modeled and therefore have adopted myself is making sure when you're working in the global realm that you're not doing anything that's like inappropriate or outside of your skill set, right? I think we're hopefully all working to be better at this, but we've heard stories, or we've been the person that's a third-year medical student who goes on a trip somewhere and does some procedure that they would have never been allowed to do at their home institution. And I hope we're all actively working to reflect on the ethics of that and change that in our own personal practice. And that was taught to me and modeled for me as a resident. And so I try to share that as well. My first question, actually, one of my very first questions I remember asking is this even appropriate? Like, can I be teaching people right out of residency? And the answer was yes. Like, they were very aware of where I was at. I wasn't claiming to be anyone other than a recent graduate. And, I was still one step above, and therefore able to not be the expert on all topics, but be able to be a topic expert on some topics that are appropriate because I was trained in them as a pediatrician who had completed residency. So I want to assure you, they were really great in helping me ensure that it was an adequate position for me. And then also providing the additional tools. SEED is actively recruiting clinicians primarily to be educators. There is no requirement for formal education, but you do get so much support in that. And for me, a lot of the support came in, I was given this curriculum, and looking at it like this, I felt like I was back in college, like with the registrar and trying to figure out how to book my own classes. But you can see they go through courses, right? So everyone starts in emergency pediatrics. And then as you progress through your first, second, and third year, it's very much like at least how my medical school blocks were. You get a whole block on ethics and gender, you get a whole block on growth and development, and then you do infectious disease and immunology. And then they actually get formal teaching on teaching and learning, which at least at my medical school, I think they were working to get better at, but were not great at when I left. And so as you can see, these are the things that I would be doing from day to day, which is so different than when I was a resident, is teaching and lecturing on these topics with the medical students and also the Masters of Medicine students at the university. So a big part of my job was helping to coordinate these courses, write timetables, which are I think most of the people I interact with here would call them like a syllabi, and figuring out like what are the core topics that need to be taught to trainees using Ugandan curriculums as a model. So those like in Kampala, where the first pediatrics residency was started, but then also some around the world materials, right? So looking at the ACGME pediatrics requirements in America, and then looking at the UK, like what they consider core competencies, and blending all those to help create a very well-rounded curriculum. I think for context, it's important. When I was there, it was the third year of the pediatric residency program. So the first class actually was, were seniors getting prepared to graduate, while I got to be there with them for the year, which was really cool. So everyone had already, completed this year one pathway. The university as a whole, this was our third time going through it, and every year adding to it and adding to it. But I feel like it was a unique opportunity to be learning alongside them of how do we do this well, because it was a kind of an infantile program. They had just started this at the university. Here's a sample of what our day would look like. And I kind of already alluded to this, but in the morning from 8 to 9, you'd have a lecture. Sometimes it's with me, sometimes it's with other people. Very similar, again, similarities to how a lot of us did in our residencies. You may be doing is, you have scheduled didactics every Wednesday. For us, it was a journal club. The pediatrics department has an incredibly robust journal club that I think Seed was, this was before I got there, but instrumental in helping partner and provide resources and instruction on how to get the departments all on board for this. And it was so well received. I mean, the attendance is just great. So many people participate. You have all the attendings along with the residents, and med students would join. They'd have, national experts. There was quite a few, the malaria vaccine progressed a lot in the last year. And so we had quite a few lectures on that from people actually doing the work on what it's looking like and how it might affect malaria in Uganda. So selfishly learned a lot from there, but also it was really cool to see how that got integrated and how well received it was. Then from like 9 to 1-ish, we would have ward rounds. And then in the afternoons would be seminars, another topic I was not familiar with. Hence why the title of this lecture involved me being a teacher, but also a learner. Seminars are, some of you may do this at UCSF. I did not have this experience, but you come in the afternoon and there's a topic, here we have congenital anomalies. This is from our pulmonary block. And the students themselves, whether it be the residents or the med students, had prepared to discuss the topic. Everyone had prepared every piece. And then I was just there to be the facilitator of the discussion, right? My job was mostly to sit down and be quiet and to help them organize their thoughts and answer questions. But for the most part, this is student-led dialogue and instruction, which, adult learning theory, if anyone's interested in that, it's key, right? And so that was how we spent our afternoons, keeping in mind that there was still clinical work to be done. So everyone's always multitasking, always doing lots of work there. Another part of my job was writing test questions, which again, this is, if you want to know more about the specifics, Seed provided us, some resources with that, lots of support. I know I was constantly emailing our educational and clinical support through Seed, both in country, in Uganda, and out of country at our home base in Boston, to get some support there, but writing, test questions, essay questions, really supporting them through their master's program. So this was just a fun day of me facilitating tests. You can see these were first year residents at the time. They are now second year residents, and they're great. So this is one of our classes together. I thought this was funny. Dr. Akeem would appreciate this, and WhatsApped him about it, but he's not sleeping. It's just I timed this poorly, but this photo made us all laugh. These are all the residents. We're all in a room outside the unit, working on the pulmonary physical exam. So one of my favorite parts of all of our units is I would do this with the residents and the med students, but we would all get together and as a group go through the entire, by system physical exam. How do you do a respiratory exam? And unlike my experience with standardized patients, we use real patients and real parents who were willing to participate and help us. And so that was always a highlight of our units. I think here we are doing the respiratory exam. I think I stole a lot from our respiratory block. But there's a lot of peer-to-peer discussion. You know, Dr. O'Care, who you see here on the right, watching intently, is now he wasn't at the time, but he's now the chief resident. And so these two guys actually here, Dr. Hakeem and Dr. Ronald, they were the senior residents when I left. They had been the rising third years, and were just so great at taking over and teaching their peers. This is our nutrition unit. And so it's this beautiful outdoor unit where patients who work here chronically for like malnutrition and nutrition support could live and stay. And also there was a beautiful garden to help, you know, facilitate like cultivating of an educational side of like how you can plant and have your own food. I learned a lot there, but this is actually a photo of one of our days where we would do clinical exams. So I don't know if you guys did OSCEs or like standardized patient exams is what I called them in med school. But we did these like maybe once every month, once every 2 months with the medical students and the residents. And so we would go and have a checklist, and I have it. Oh, here we go. Yeah. So sometimes it would be, this is a really great, one of her first long case presentations, a pretty good score there. You know, just an example of a rubric that we would use. And, you know, they would, sometimes it would be like, you know, present a system, like, you know, demonstrate the respiratory exam and, you know, well, you know, if you auscultate in all the right places, you know, check off and all that. But then sometimes it would be more integrative, right? Like here is a case, present it, and then have you included the relative subjective data, objective data. And a lot of the year was really spent working with my colleagues to develop rubrics that, like, to modify existing rubrics and to come up with things that really work well for our students and that adequately reflect, you know, just as an example, I think early on in the year, we had been kind of using an arbitrary, like, you know, you get an 8 out of 10, you get a, you know, 6 out of 10, but not really standardized, right, for each student. So all kind of learning together, how do we standardize this so that, number one, our students get constructive feedback about, you know, what parts they need to improve and what parts they excel at, and how can we do that so where it's kind of more uniformly applied across the board. So it's just an example. This is one of my favorite photos. These are some of our awesome residents. We have a couple of first years and second years and our third years. So there's one friend missing. But when I first arrived, there were 7 residents. And then because of COVID, everything was shifted about 6 months. So even though I arrived in July, which should have been the beginning of the academic year, it was actually the middle, which was really fun for me because that meant in January, instead of it being a midterm, I actually got to receive a whole new group of residents and graduate some of our old ones. So altogether got to work with 10 Masters of Medicine students who were all lovely, and got to not only lecture, mentor clinically, but also partner with academically. Like Dr. Hakeem here is working on some, his interest is in pediatric endocrinology. And so trying to get him partnered with people who can help him facilitate his research project and kind of do for him what was done for me. So that's an extra piece of what's my experience was like there. That's my cat Coco. I adopted him while I was in Uganda. And this is just to illustrate, I also did write-ups from all of the med students. They would learn how to write up H&Ps and present them. And so I would grade a lot of those papers at home, which was a fun experience, and write constructive things on there. And Coco liked to help with the grading of the papers. Here's another fun exam photo, this time in a fancier room. These are our third year students taking some exams. I did a lot of exam facilitating. And that's just the educational piece, right? And that's it was a huge part of my day, but also a very small part in a way. The other piece was working at the regional referral center. And so again, maybe a little different than the system that you might be used to working in if you're a UCSF resident, but really 2 discrete entities. A lot of the faculty either work at the university or work at the hospital, and the financing might be different. So there was some nuances to that. And there was a whole new system for me to learn. And I guess this, since it's popped into my mind, would be a good time to mention something else that worked really well for me and something that I have continued to implement every time I'm in a new space, which is when you go somewhere where everything's very different, whether that's a whole new country where you've never been, or for me, I've never lived on the West Coast, never been an ICU fellow until now. Try your best to just be in that environment without trying to affect change right away in that environment. Because you don't know what to change, right? You're just basing it on your old biases and what you think is the right way to do things. And I think what was beautiful about committing to 1 year with Seed, which is so small in the grand scheme of things, but also, significantly more than a lot of us got to do as residents, was I had time, right? I was able to say, like, I can spend 2 to 3 months just being in the wards, right? And not trying to say, well, like, oh, I think you should, do such and such with rounds, or I think you should give meds this way, and that's why they're not being given on time, or, like trying to nitpick at little things and really being in the system and saying what works well here. If something's not working well, why? Is that a limitation of the system? Is that just a knowledge gap? Is that neither, right? Is that just not been elucidated yet? Is it working well and I just don't have all the data? It really allowed me the space to ask those questions, which I have found already, even in my first 3 months of fellowship, to be really an invaluable practice, to have the ability to walk into a new environment and not immediately be uncomfortable with what's different and therefore want to change it, which is a very human response, but to be able to pause and say, like, I am a visitor. The systems are the way they are for a reason. People may want to change them, or they may want to improve them, or they may have something to teach me because they may be better than what I have already experienced. But either way, let me just experience it and then kind of make decisions later. And so I had the beauty of doing that in the regional referral hospital in an educational capacity. I started out just kind of going to rounds, being an extra like faculty member to teach on rounds. There's always amazing patients to teach on, always so many people eager to learn around. And then after I'd actually been there for several months, like 5 months, is when I was really, I then put myself on the clinical roster, right? Where now I'm the attending on service for the month, or for a couple of weeks at a time in either the high dependency unit, which was called the ACU, or the acute care unit. This would be kind of our equivalent of a step down unit. And then also, yes, thank you. So I see Nick Edinger wanting to make changes right away is a very Western impulse. Absolutely, right? So I said human, but I thank you for that clarification. It's actually a very Western human impulse. And it's one that I constantly find myself combating, especially as a very vocal and not shy person, of saying I have pretty severe ADHD. It's unmedicated. Immediately I try to bounce from topic to topic and, want to change things here and there. I'm constantly in the microcosm fighting that impulse, right? Don't change the vent too soon. Give the kids some time to settle out as an intensivist, but then also, right, in a new space. And again, the me learning component of this year has very much been, I have seen myself grow in that impulse is there, but I'm able to now, a lot of the time, it's obviously not perfect, recognize that and internalize that and then not act on it. As a loud, person and just a boisterous person in general, interrupting is something you could probably guess is one of my weaknesses. I'm very quick to jump in and chime in and ask a question and really try to engage and follow up. But the one area where I've somehow magically got really good at really fast is, you will see, I will try really hard and most of the time be successful at not interrupting the residents when they present. Now as a fellow, I mean, it could be like your first day as a med student and you could be fumbling through this presentation because you just don't know yet. And I'm going to let you fumble all the way through it, like not in a mean way, but in a, you're not efficient at one-liners, right? Like it's your first day kind of thing. I'm going to let you get all the way through it before I interrupt you and ask clarifying questions or correct you. And that's something that I was, I learned, I was taught kind of by this environment of, just just be there, just take it in before you act on anything, and then make decisions. I think that has been an invaluable skill already at this point in my fellowship, and then hopefully was valuable for the students and residents that I was teaching last year. So acute care unit, and then the general pediatrics ward, which is, pretty self-explanatory. And so I would kind of do a week on service at a time in these places, very similar to probably what you're used to. This is the front of the hospital. This is the one photo I didn't take. This is a Google image, and that's just because I realized I forgot to take a picture of the gate. But this is what I walk through every morning to go to work. And this is the outside. I think it's actually, they've just redone it a little bit, but this is our waiting area of patients waiting to be admitted to the unit. And I've done my best to blur out faces because I did not get consent for these photos. So you shouldn't see any personal faces there. These people I do have consent for. This is inside of our pediatrics ward. And this right here is the great Dr. Abeso. She is the lead pediatrician from the hospital side. She also does things with the university because she's just incredible. But this is her kind of giving us a tour on our first day. And then some of my residents here, some of our awesome nurses on the unit. Just kind of quickly go through the rest of these. So you can get a feel for what it was like. This is our general pediatrics ward. Again, for privacy, people's faces have been blurred out. And this is a bunch of our kiddos in the general ward. Here's our acute care ward, which I spent the majority of my time in. Just a sample lab report. Again, no identifying patient information there. And then the entrance to our acute care unit. And what was interesting about the acute care unit, and which I really liked, is, you can see all these people sitting out here. This is actually where we triage the patients, and we triage them right next to the entrance to what will be the equivalent of like our resuscitation bay. So this is not the ED, but this kind of functioned as a pediatric ED in a way, even though the hospital had its own emergency department. So it was really great if a kid was brought in, every one thing that I talked with the residents about, and that I would make a practice doing, is kind of, walk through the group and see, is there any child that's laying there, unresponsive, or, does someone need more care? And Dr. Abeso and Dr. Abeso's in the early phases, and I'm hoping to still help her. We kind of started coming up with a way to maybe better triage these patients, right? So it's a QI project that is kind of in the early phases, but was born out of our own clinical experiences here. And one thing that I learned is, to kind of always be looking for how systems work. And then when the people in that environment want to make it better, that's the place you want to plug in, right? And so Dr. Abeso, who's been working and living in this environment at her hospital for years, I'm a visitor here. She says, in triage, what we've seen is, when kids finally get to the front of the line, they're hypoxemic, or they've been seizing the whole time, or they're incredibly pale and really needed a blood transfusion 2 hours ago. And so we picked those 3 topics and said, well, how can we design some kind of like screener and intake form to quickly identify those children, so that it's not first come first serve, but we're really able to institute a more effective triage system. And so that was a clinical question that came up in my time there, and actually turned into a project that we're working on. And I'm not sure what along the way, just another plug / random fact, I learned that quality improvement and implementation science is what I'm interested in. But a lot of this was just me, like I said, very early on in this presentation, finding people who are doing good work, even if I'm not sure if it's the kind of work I want to do clinically, like research wise, because we're so research heavy, a lot of us. And then just going and doing things and seeing what sticks, right? And so for me, I was really fortunate. Dr. Abeso loved quality improvement, because that's what I ended up wanting to pursue as well. Here's just another inside of our wards. On the left, you have the resuscitation bays. And then on the right, this is just another picture of the general wards that I threw in there. I wanted to close out the hospital section with these awesome residents, because they're literally the best. I hope you got to meet some of them if you did more sessions with us. The seed partnership. So in my last 5 minutes, I didn't realize I would have so many things to say. Apologies. So beyond the work of the university and the hospital, Seed's also doing things with partnering with the government in our area. And, this was the Minister of Health came and did a seminar with us and talked about COVID in the area and our vaccine numbers, and got to participate in that. Quarterly, Seed has meetings where we all kind of come together and discuss the partnership and what we've done and where we can go from there. I loved that our partnership meeting was in this child care center on campus, so that's why I took this photo. It wasn't only a pediatrics meeting, but I felt like pediatrics was well represented with this meeting place. This was right before I had to leave. We had our quarterly meeting to really discuss the future of the partnership, and it was really productive. We had people from the Boston team, you can see scattered throughout here, actually came to Uganda so that we could all work together and talk and keep moving forward. One of my colleagues is doing her PhD right now, and she invited me and a lot of our colleagues to participate in a seminar that's going to give her more data for her dissertation. So that's what this is a photo of. And these next ones are just to illustrate. So I got so many more things beyond, the 4 little things on my job description. This is Dr. Hassan. He is a medical intern who was rotating from Somalia. And he and a group of his friends were really interested in learning more about pediatrics. So they actually pulled me aside one day after rounds and asked if I would do some extra lectures with them after hours. Which I've never been asked if I could do more teaching. So obviously I was ecstatic. And so we actually had a little Zoom group, and we would meet once a week and talk about topics they were interested in. Definitely one of the highlights of my year, and totally not in my job description. This cake is the only photo I took because I was having too much fun, but I got invited to speak at one of the women's Rotary Club events. A lot of our female med students are involved in that. And they invited me, as well as some of my much more impressive and astute colleagues. I was very surprised to be invited to just give a talk similar to this about the women in medicine and what they're doing in Mbale and just celebrating them, basically. So we had this really fun dinner and this delicious cake, and this is a confetti cannon that we obviously popped, and it was really fun. This is one of my sweet medical students who I realized lived down the street from me. So I obviously started going to see her, and she became a dear friend, and her sweet daughter, Pauline. I promise Pauline likes me. This is just not a good photo. But I got to hang out with them all the time, and the mentorship that I created, the mentorship and friendship with the students is another highlight of my year. And then, if you logged on early, you heard us talking about Dr. Okello. This is Dean Okello. He is about to start, or literally like this month, his pediatrics residency. He's just a general physician in Uganda who was affiliated with our program and was an incredible teaching assistant for the pediatrics department. So much so that they asked him to wait a year before he started residency so he could stay on. So his kind of extra gap year was with me, helping me coordinate the program. And he's an invaluable resource. He's so great. He's a great clinician, and I'm hoping he's going to continue to be my research partner going forward. This is Prosy. She was one of our awesome dietitians in the nutrition ward. And then this is my fiance. He wasn't my fiance in this photo. He was just my boyfriend, came to visit. You can see that's me and my friend Katie just doing some scary hiking. This is the beauty of Uganda. This is a casual elephant on the road when we did our these are all the places that my fiance and I visited when he came. We got to drive around this incredible country. This is, I think, like 2,500 miles that we did in like 10 days, see all these incredible places. We got engaged in Uganda, which highly recommend if anyone is needing a beautiful place to do that. And so my final thoughts, and I recognize I'm at time. These pictures are a bit blurry, but they were taken by a colleague of mine, and I adore them. This was my going away dinner that I didn't know was going to happen. But you can see half the time we're not looking at the camera, we're just smiling and having a grand old time. These are all my pediatrics colleagues and students. The brilliant Dr. Abeso next to me. this is the incredible dinner that we had, and really just talking and sharing about our experiences, and being so grateful for the year that we had, but then also reflecting on how I hopefully will get to continue to partner in a different capacity on this side of, the world. And, Teresa and Sohel have helped make that happen, actually through, this lecture series, even, and partnering with my awesome residents over there who I miss dearly. This is the dean of Busatema University, who also happened to be my downstairs neighbor, my whole year there. Incredible man. And then just this photo of my pediatrics colleagues makes me smile. So I threw all these in at the end. And then finally, a semi other plug, while I was in Uganda, I interviewed for pediatrics intensive care fellowship remotely, found out I matched at UCSF while I was there. And ironically, Saad is a UCSF HEAL fellow in surgery. Casey is a UCSF OBGYN fellow. And then HEAL fellow. And then Bua is one of the Ugandan surgery HEAL fellows. So HEAL is, if you've not heard of them, is associated with UCSF. And so we used to joke like, oh, look, there's 4 co-fellows, and we're all here in Eastern Uganda together, affiliated with UCSF. So all that to say, in these last 2 informative slides, please screenshot. I've also linked at the end for you. I'm happy to talk ad infinitum, as you can probably tell, about this experience, but in case you're worried about the logistics, it's all covered. I mean, the pay, the travel, the booster became available in December while I was there, and they literally reimbursed me to come back to the US and get boosted, which that's a whole other, resources inequity thing that we could talk about another time, but, doing our best to keep people safe and also stay on the field during COVID. Insurance, malpractice, all that covered. And then as an extra bonus, if you serve a year with them, you get a designation through Massachusetts General Hospital of having done an obviously non-AGME accredited fellowship in global clinical education. So it's an amazing perk. I here have just included my contact info, the placement dates that Seed is hoping to fill. In case you can't tell, I recommend this 1,000 times over. This QR code will link you to this website, depending on if you're a millennial and want to use it or not. And then these are my favorite COVID signs. To conclude my game of what Uganda does better than the US, COVID signs by far are way better. Want a hug? No is the best one, in my opinion. And then here's just a lovely cocktail to encourage everyone to get their COVID vaccine. Thank you for having me. I'm post-call and hyped up on caffeine, so a little speedier than usual with my talking. Thanks for bearing with me. Thanks for letting me participate. This has been an incredible full circle moment. If you're a UCSF resident or faculty member, I hope to see you around on the unit. Please reach out to me. I'm also happy to talk via phone or in person. However I can help, whether that's with global things, whether that's with not matching, whether that's with ICU, whether it's just life. I'm really happy to meet everyone. If there's any questions, I know we're over time, so feel free to log off. But if there's any questions or thoughts or comments, I'd be happy to receive those. But otherwise, hope you guys all have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, Lindsey. First of all, I wish I had even like an ounce of your energy post-call. I don't think that that's coffee. I think that's your general enthusiasm for life. Thank you so much for making the time, especially when you are on a busy rotation and we're up all night to share your story with us. It's really inspirational and so great to hear it from you. I put a couple of links in the chat to the C General website. And then if you're interested in the application as well, which might be the same as where the QR code takes you. And then Karen, I apologize, I lost your email if you want to put that in the chat too for folks. And then the one other thing that showed up magically in the chat is our eval link. It has like 3 or 4 really short questions, but we do really value your feedback and take it into consideration year after year. So please take a moment to fill that out. And then I will open it up for, we probably have time for maybe like one question if anyone has anything for Lindsey.
I have a really quick question. I know that I just want to just hear from your perspective how you navigated any language barriers being a teacher. I'm maybe all the students spoke English, but perhaps some didn't. And just how is that? How did you go about with that?
That's a great question. And also a great perk of this specific job opening that I neglected to mention. Again, this is like a Western bias thing, but if it's a barrier for you, everyone in Uganda speaks English. It's wild. I used to joke, I'm always the dumbest person in the room because I only speak English and Unit 3 level Duolingo Spanish. And so like, I was always the dumbest person in the room because everyone spoke 7 languages, but even a lot of your patients are going to speak English actually, even, and then the ones in the village, it's always fun. All the residents speak English as well as multiple other languages, some local, some not. And so they would help each other out with trading patients based on who spoke what language. But for this specific job, it really wasn't a barrier at all. In fact, I regret not pushing myself harder to learn Luganda and Lugisu because I didn't have to. And that was, you know, if I had had more time, if that's something I would have done, but the language barrier wasn't an issue at all. In fact, I think it was more of an issue for our students who were coming from Somalia, who a lot of them, including one of my residents, had just recently learned English and yet were somehow residents in a whole new medical system. It's mind-blowing. So I think for some other people, like maybe in Malawi, that may be more of an issue. And maybe Kieran can comment on how they help navigate that, but specifically for Uganda and especially in Mbale, that wouldn't be a barrier for you, which is a huge perk if you're trying to kind of ease into this. But I wouldn't let it deter you anywhere else. It's one of my favorite things to do on the wards is grab the interpreter iPad and talk. It's there's always people around who are willing to help you.
Hi, everyone. I can chime in quickly. I'm Kieran. I'm the Associate Director of Pediatrics for SEED Global Health. Thanks, Lindsey, for that talk. It was so nice to relive your year with you. The countries that we work in, many of them are former British colonies, and so the teaching language is always in English, and English proficiency is what's expected for all of the educators. And then, like Lindsey was mentioning, plus minus your communication with patients. They may or may not know English, but you should always be working with trainees who would also be able to serve as interpreters for you if needed.
Great question. Pragmatic question. I like it.
Well, thank you, Lindsey, so much. I hope you get a little bit more rest before you go back in tomorrow. And thanks everyone for being here. We have one more day of our lecture series starting tomorrow morning. So hope to see some of you there and all of the residents, of course, tomorrow morning. All right. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, Lindsey.
Thanks, Teresa. Thanks so much.